Hello, so this session will be on multiplying surds and of course simplifying further if we have to. Alright, so you can call this a surd law, and that is if you have, for example, the square root of, instead of a number I'll put x, okay, which is one number, times the square root of another number, which I can call y. So we have two different numbers, just say we had 2 and 3. This will equal, the square root of x times y. So what you have to realize here is the numbers under the square root can be multiplied with each other as long as they are both under the square root. Okay. Now sometimes we end up with surds like this, where we have, for example, 2 square root of 5. There's a surd, but I notice I have a 2 out here. And with ones like this, we can do another mini formula, and that is if we have a number on the outside, just say a was 2, and then x again, times a number on the outside again, which can be b, square root, we'll use y again. Okay, so for this one, if you ever have numbers on the outside of the square root, they are simply multiplied together. So we would end up with ab on the outside, or a times b, square root x times y. Okay, and that's all you have to remember when it comes to multiplying surds. And if this is confusing you, we'll use numbers and you'll see what we mean by these two main formulas that you have to remember. They're both the same, it's just that the second one is showing you we have a number on the outside of the square root. Okay, so just remember, numbers on the outside of the square root can be multiplied with each other. Numbers on the inside of the square root can also then be multiplied with each other. Okay, so let's practice with some questions. Okay, so with these two questions here, we'll start with the first one, and we can see that we are multiplying. First of all, that's our operation. And now all we're going to do is go 2 times the 3, because they're both under the square root. Okay, so 2 times 3, and that equals 6. And we're done. Always check, can we further simplify this 6? Is there a perfect square that's a factor of 6? No. So 6 can't be simplified anymore, and it's a surd. Alright, so 2, we do the exact same thing. We've got 2 times 3 on the outside. So on the outside, we have 2 times 3, which is 6, your square root symbol. And on the inside, we have 3 times 10. And 3 times 10 is 30. And that's our answer. Now let's check and see, can we simplify the square root of 30? No, we can't, because I can't think of a perfect square that's a factor of 30. So our final answer is 6 square root of 30. Now just quickly, if you remember how to simplify surds, for example, if you had the square root of 12 and you were asked to simplify this surd, then you'd have to think of a perfect square of 12, which is a factor, it's 4. So I could write 12 like this, square root of 4 times 3. And we know we're using 4 because 4 is a perfect square. Now, if you remember this sort of rule that we can do, and that is separate these two numbers, square root of 4 times the square root of 3. A way to remember what to do when multiplying surds is to think of this. Simplifying, we are breaking down that law when it comes to multiplying surds, and that is we had 4 times 3 both under the square root, and now they're both separated. So to go backwards, you just go 4 times 3 to give you 12, and we know that this would equal the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 3 stays the same. Okay, and that's would be our final answer. But I just showed you this just to point out where we have actually seen this index law when multiplying surds, and that is it comes under simplifying surds, and in this part just here, that's the multiplication I guess law when it comes to surds. Okay, our next question that I just managed to squeeze in, and we can see we're multiplying all of these surds, so let's go. We've got the square root of 2 times square root of 3 square root of 3 times negative square root of 6. So our first step is, well, let's take care of our negatives. Will my whole answer be a negative or a positive? I can see I've got 2 negatives, therefore my answer will be positive. So I've taken care of my negatives. Next, I'll multiply any numbers on the outside. I've got a 1 here times 3 times 1, which is just going to be 3 on the outside, square root And now multiply everything on the inside. 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 times 6 is 36. Okay, now that positive can be invisible, and we end up with this. Now, please make sure you double check what you have, and we notice we have the square root of 36, and this can be simplified. Now, we know that there, in between the 3 and square root of 36 is a times, so I have 3 times, and what is the square root of 36? 36 is a perfect square, and I know the square root of 36 is 6, and 3 times 6 leaves me with 18. So my final answer was actually a whole number. I didn't end up with a surd as my final answer. I started off with surds being multiplied together, and eventually when I simplified this, I ended up with 18. So always check and see if you can simplify your whatever you have under the square root. Sometimes they might be perfect squares, sometimes they may not be, but you know how to simplify. Okay, another question. Once again, we are multiplying all of these surds. So first of all, let's take care of any negatives. 2 negatives here, 1, 2. That means my final answer will be positive, so I can cross those off. And I might change my color. So negatives are taken care of. Next, I've got 2 times a 3 times a 1 there. What's 2 times 3? Well, on the outside, I'll have 6 square root. And then inside, under the square roots, we've got 6 times a 2, which is 12. And 12 times 2 leaves me with 24. Now, we know we don't stop here. Let's see if we can simplify 24. Now, 24 is not a perfect square, but I know a factor of 24 that is. And I know 4 times 6 is 24. So I can simplify this further. So that positive can become invisible now. So we have 6, the times there. So 6 times. Now, I'm going to write 24 like this. 4 times 6. Still 24. Next, I'm going to separate these, and we know that we can do this. So square root of 4 times the square root of 6. And now the square root of 4, because it's sort of by itself, I know that equals 2, a whole number 2. So I have 6 times, that's now a 2. So I might cross that off and write 2. Times the square root of 6. The square root of 6, that 6 is still under the square root. It can't go away. And our final answer, I'll just squeeze it over here because I haven't got any more room. 6 times 2, that is simply 12. It's on the outside, and square root of 6. And we're done. Just remember there's a times in between the 12 and the square root of 6. That's now invisible. And that is our final answer. We can't simplify the 6 anymore. And that's it. Our next question involves us to expand the following question. So whenever you see brackets and a number on the outside, it's asking you to expand. If you haven't learned how to do this, then you need to just revise on how to do this. But basically, there's an invisible times in between that square root of 3 and the bracket. And all you're going to do is get the square root of 3 times the 2 and also times the square root of 5. They just simply, everything in the brackets gets a turn to be multiplied with the square root of 3. And that's it. So we'll be left with, to show some clear working out, I'm going to use brackets in my answer. So my first step is the square root of 3 times the square root of 2. And there's a plus in the middle, so plus. And the square root of 3 is positive, so keep that in mind. And in bracket again, the square root of 3 times the square root of 5. And I'll do them separately. So the square root of 3 times the square root of 2, we know that surd law, we simply multiply anything under the square root. So we have the square root of 6 here, plus 3 times 5 is 15, square root of 15. Okay, and now this is where we have to use our knowledge on adding and subtracting surds. Now, can we go 6 plus the square root of 6 plus the square root of 15? No, but don't just stop there. Just make sure, check and see, can we simplify our 6 any further? No, we can't. Can we simplify our 15 any further? Is there a perfect square that's a factor of 15? I can't think of any, because 3 times 5 is 15. Neither of those are perfect squares, and that's pretty much it. So that's our final answer. Okay, our next question, once again, we have to expand this. And the only reason why this one's more challenging than the other is because we've got a negative out here. So just be careful with your negatives. And you'll notice that when we go this times that, we'll end up with a negative, and that times that, we will end up with a positive because the 2 square root of 3 is actually a negative there. But I'll show you how to do this step by step. Okay, so our first step is, well, that times that. So I'll put it in brackets, minus 2 square root 6 times 3 square root of 2. Now, I have a takeaway in between them, so I'm going to write the takeaway now. Takeaway. And be very careful not to write it again. So what I mean is, I've put it down here already. So now that times that, this is a minus 2 square root 6. So minus 2 square root 6 times 2 square root of 3. Okay? I've already taken care of my negative by putting it over here. So that take away that. Just be very careful. Okay, and next we end up with, well, minus 2 times the 3. So numbers on the outside are multiplied together. So minus 2 times 3 is minus 6. Square root 6 times 2 is 12. And then I'll put my minus. So minus, what do we end up with in here? So we've got minus 2 times a positive 2. So that is minus 4. And square root 6 times 3 is 18. And you notice how the two negatives now make a positive. And like I said, you could have done that mentally. You could see what is going to happen. A negative and a positive here make a negative. A negative and a negative would end up making a positive. But I've just shown you how to do it step by step, just in case you need to show working out and just need to practice a bit more. Alright, so we end up with, I'll just write it out again. We've got minus 6 square root of 12. That's now a plus 4 square root of 18. Now, can we add these together? No, we can't because they're both different. But do we stop there? No. I know I can simplify the 12, and I know I can simplify the 18 because I know that, just thinking mentally, that 4 times 3 is 12, and I know that here 9 times 2 is 18. And a 4 is a perfect square, and a 9 is a perfect square. So I'll just clear the page. Sorry, I forgot to pause it. I was supposed to pause it then, but anyway. So now, you can see what I've done. 12 can be written as 4 times 3, 18, 9 times 2. We know why we're doing this. Our next step is to separate them. So I end up with minus 6 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 3 plus, and then I've got 4 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. If you're confident with this, you can actually skip this step and just show this step here and then work it out. But that's fine if you want to show, I'm just showing you this step here just to make sure you know what's happening. Alright, and now we end up with the square root of 4. It's a minus 6. Square root of 4, I know, becomes a 2. And the square root of 9 will become a 3 because 3 times 3 is 9. So we've got 6 times 2 times the square root of 3 plus, in between them, 4 times the 3 times the square root of 12. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could put brackets just to say that we're working on both sides and there's a plus in between them. And now minus 6 times 2, well, minus 6 times 2 is minus 12. They're both whole numbers, times the square root of 3. I'm done there. Plus in between them. 4 times 3 is just 12. Okay, and, oh, sorry, that should be a 2 in there. Okay, and times, it was here too, the square root of 2. And now that our surds have been simplified all the way, double check. Can we now add these two surds together? No, we can't. I've got the square root of 3 here and the square root of 2. Because they're both different, just like x and y, we cannot simplify any further, so we're done. Okay, so what I want you to do now is just complete the following questions, just to keep practicing. And I'll put the answers up for you in a second. Okay, these should be the correct answers for those 4 questions that you had. With the first one, if you didn't get this answer, it's because maybe you forgot that the square root of 4 actually equals 2. So keep that little step in mind. So that's the first step, and then that's my final answer. And the rest of them I just got from the back of the book because I'm in a bit of a hurry. But if you can't get the same answers, just come and let me know, and because the back of the book could be wrong. So hopefully that's helped you, and keep practicing if you need to. Thank you.